Hey, this is Chelsea Dupre, co-host of Girl Hustle. Thanks for listening to the following podcast on Public House Media.
Hey, this is Selena, and you're listening to Stories from Planet Earth. I'm here today with my dad.
Hello.
Thank you so much for taking some time to be on the podcast.
Of course. I've always wanted to be interviewed.
Yeah, well, I am looking forward to it. I always start off asking where you're originally from.
So, I was born in the Bronx, and then I moved to Florida with my stepdad and my mom, and then he was in the Army, so then we moved to Massachusetts, and I lived in Georgia for a little while, and stayed with family, and then we ended up moving to Texas. I graduated, and then I joined the Army.
Right. So, let's talk a little bit about each of the places you've lived, because you moved around a ton. So, you started in New York, went to Florida.
Correct.
So, what was it like moving from New York to Florida? Because those are pretty different places, especially in the time that you moved, I feel like.
Well, I was really young. I left New York in 83 or 84. It was like 4 or 5. So really, I mean, the transition was what you would think a child would think of it. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, I thought the entirety of Florida was Disney World. And I was let down when I got to the airport and I saw the Chippendale mascot uniform wearing people. Mm-hmm. I was very disappointed. But Florida was awesome. I lived in Florida until I was 12, I think, if I remember right. And, it was a lot of time, spent going to the beach and doing what people who grow up in Florida do. I spent a lot of time in the woods, catching lizards and snakes and, living the wild boy life. It's very cool.
Yeah, some of my favorite stories you used to tell us growing up were about your times wandering through the woods and all of the crazy encounters you had with wildlife.
That's funny, too, because growing up, I watched, the Discovery Channel and the Learning Channel, all the rest of those types of shows, and I really wanted to be like an animal biologist. So I spent a lot of time in the woods, pretending I was like the Australian guy catching alligators and snakes and stuff. It was cool. I have had a lot of interesting animal encounters.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners one of your favorite animal encounters?
So the funniest one is my dad built my mom an atrium, sort of where she could put her plants and stuff like that in the patio in the apartment complex that we lived in. So my grandfather came to live with me, and I have to say that my grandfather was like my idol. I thought he was, to be a man was to be like him. Super tough and interesting stories, was in the Army during the Korean War and just a man's man. And we were moving, so my grandfather was helping my mom and some of her friends and my dad move all the stuff out of there and kind of unbuild, deconstruct that thing. And I was in my room playing Nintendo, and I hear a woman scream, or what I think was a woman. And so when I move, I leave the room, and I go out. I see my grandfather fly by me in a flash. I didn't know that he was scared of snakes. So I go out and I go out into the living room and I look through the back door and I see my mom's friend with a broom swatting at something on the ground. It was hilarious. So I go out wondering what's going on. And they're all trying to get at this little snake that's about a foot long and acting like it's a 26-foot anaconda. It was the most hilarious scene and one of the funnier animal encounters I've had.
That is funny. I don't think you've ever told me that story. What about the time when you were fishing and something rubbed against your leg? That's one of my favorite stories.
Oh, so we used to fish in a place called Jetty Park, and it had a sandbar kind of far out into the surf. And I would go out with my dad, and I'd go out to the sandbar, and just hang out with him while he was fishing, and he would send me back to get bait or any new tackle that he needed or whatever. So on one of these little missions that he'd sent me on. I'm walking back to the beach, to the shore, and as I'm walking, I get to about chest deep water, and I was probably like, I don't know, 7 or 8 or something like that, and I feel this thing rub against me. I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to die. There's a shark in the water. So I kind of panic, I freeze, and I'm looking around, and I see this thing, enormous thing. I mean, of course, I'm looking at it through the lens of a 7 or 8-year-old, so it's gigantic. And it circles around me, and then it surfaces right in front of me, and it was a manatee. I was so terrified. So terrified.
Even when you found out it was a manatee?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is still really big, and I'm not that big,
Yeah.
7 or 8. It was pretty funny. My mom was on the beach looking at me when this happened. Of course, I got to the beach, and I told her it was a giant shark, and, I fought for my life.
Naturally.
Naturally.
So what about your time in New York? Because you did move back after you lived in Florida for a while, didn't you?
I would go back for the summers occasionally. And I was, I'd just go out. I lived kind of, when I went back to New York was more, I didn't go to school in New York or anything like that. I normally went during the summer. So it was just hanging out with my cousins and doing what New York people do. I'd go to the park. We went to a place called Orchard Beach, which was really cool. So, and just the Bronx life, riding the subway, eating pizza, cool stuff.
That is cool. I've never been to New York, so it's interesting to hear, what that would be like to actually live there, even if it was just briefly for the summer.
Yeah, I didn't really get the full New York experience as a New Yorker who lives in New York, but I rode the subway, I hung out with my family, and just did, visiting New York kind of stuff with family there.
Mm-hmm. And that was in the 90s probably?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, late 80s, early 90s.
Okay, cool. Yeah, whenever New York was still kind of, it was more dangerous back then, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. I got a lot of interesting stories about that. But I didn't really, when I went there, I didn't really experience any of that because I didn't live in New York. So I hung out with my cousins. I kind of had the pass because my family lived on this block and people knew them, so I was okay.
Mm-hmm. So what was it like having a kid so young? Because I was born pretty early into your life.
Yeah, you were born when I was 15, just about to be 16. And it was a challenge, but I had great parents, and your mom and I worked well together. And I just loved being a dad. There were challenges and difficulties along the way, but we were able to do it. And I don't really remember it being terribly difficult. I loved you. I still do. And you were always with me when I was doing things. I kind of just, you being born wasn't a hindrance for me doing the things that I wanted to do. If I wanted to go fishing, I'd just take you with me. When I got home from school, I loved sitting in the living room playing with you and watching movies with you. And I don't know, it's interesting having had you so young and growing up with you to this point. I'm proud of you.
Oh, thanks, Dad. I think you did pretty well raising me and Cynthia.
Well, I tried.
Yeah.
I tried.
Yeah. And now you have another little one. A 3-year-old, right?
Yeah, 3-year-old.
Yeah, it's crazy. So the interesting part about having a kid so young is that you still have plenty of time to have more. So me and my youngest sibling are, how old was I? I was 21 when he was born. 22?
Yeah.
22, yeah. So it's pretty crazy.
By the time I was 22, your sister had already been born.
I know, it's crazy.
That had 3 kids.
25, and I'm nowhere near that point.
Well, that's a good
life.
thing, though. But that's a good thing. I think, I don't know, I think that had an impact on my life. I think I was kind of always a little bit older in my mind. And I wasn't, I don't know, I heard it once said that a lot of kids that hang out with adults are more, they're not raised to be around children. They're more raised to be around adults. So I've always been around adults. So I always thought of myself as a little older. I know that's kind of naive. You always think you're the hero of your own story. But I kind of related more to adults growing up. So I guess I was kind of uniquely prepared for it. I'd always thought, I didn't really struggle with it.
Yeah.
This is the best way that I could put it. I mean, yeah, there was financial problems along the way and things like that, but I don't know. I've always enjoyed being a dad.
Since you and mom and the step parents are all like so young, reasonably, to have like a 25-year-old, I always thought when I was younger that would be like the trajectory of my life too, just because it seemed normal.
Mm-hmm.
But wow, it's just insane to think about the fact that at my age you had 2 kids, and then Charity, my stepmom, was having her first kid at 25.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just really interesting to like look back at how I thought life was supposed to play out, just because all of my parents are so much younger than the average parent, and like how it actually worked out.
Yeah.
Which I'm really glad it worked out that way, because I could not handle a child at this age, I feel like.
Yeah, I get that. I know that was hard work, all of that, for all of us. Me, Charity, Kevin, your mom. All of us have our stories and all of that. But, I think we got to the point where we could work well together. And that, of course, getting to that point took a lot of hard work as well.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's life's an interesting journey. And an interesting perspective is what you just said. Like, you thought, looking at us, like, wow, that's the way life is supposed to be. But, you kind of get out of that atmosphere, that bubble, and you start to look at other people's lives and what quote unquote normal is. And so it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. So what was your time in the military like whenever you first enlisted?
I think wow. So my dad was in the Army. He was in the reserves and the Guard, and then he went active duty. So the military has had an enormous impact on the trajectory of my life. And so I joined the Army when I was 17, and I went to basic training. And I know a lot of people who, obviously I'm in the military, so I listen to other people's stories about going to basic training and how their experience was. And I don't look back on basic training as any fun at all, but it was very formative and very foundational in the way that I look at my life. So then I went to Korea, and I was young when I went to Korea, and I hung out with my friends, and I was in a cav unit, so it was kind of hard. It was hard work. I was a medic, so I did a lot of the medical stuff and did some training in that. I wouldn't call myself an exemplary soldier. I've kind of been like the middle of the pack. I do what I need to do, make sure that I get my job done, but I've not achieved what my initial intent was when I first joined the military. Because I think when you first join, you're like, oh, I want to go special forces. I want to jump out of planes. I want to blow stuff up and be a hero. It's a bit different than that. It's hard work. It's a bit of a sacrifice, and in some ways, it weighs heavily on the things that you do, and it's not like the movies.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So I got sent to Korea really early in my career. So I got an opportunity to be outside of the United States and see what that was like, and to have an appreciation for what, at least that spot in the world looks like, and how it compares to what we know as Americans, which was interesting, informative, and again, I think foundational in the way that I look at things.
Yeah, what was different there?
It's just a closeness. I was near the DMZ when I got there. I was in a place called Gary Owen, and in a place called Camp Stanton. I was in 4-7 Cav. So they had 2 parts. They had a ground with the tanks and the Bradley fighting vehicles and stuff like that, and then they had another part of it that was the aviation part, where they had the helicopters and stuff. So part of my tour was with the Air Cav, that was Camp Stanton, and then the other part was in Gary Owen. And when I was in Camp Stanton, I had an opportunity to go a lot of places in Korea and see a lot of different things. And I guess it's sort of like more of a rural kind of existence over there, you know. And then they got very giant cities. Seoul is huge. It was big back then. I'm sure it's even more now. I don't know. It was a different thing. It was interesting to be there and see the way that, you know, people live in a different part of the world. And, you know, it was interesting to learn a different language, and at least functionally, you know, I could order food and get a cab and say hello and goodbye. Mm-hmm. But it was cool. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So I feel like I would be remiss to not mention that we are in the middle of a global pandemic.
Yeah, we are.
So how's it been for you so far?
Well, for me at the beginning, you know, I've always been a little bit more of a Category 5 kind of person, looking at the potential for the worst case scenario. So in my mind, when I first heard about this pandemic that, you know, is affecting a different part of the world and creeping its way towards America, of course I was alarmed just like everybody else and concerned, but also concerned for how bad it can be. And being in the military, I have a bit of a different perspective, and also with what I do in the military. I am part of a team that responds to these sorts of situations. So I have a little bit of a different insight to what that looks like from a military point of view. So of course I was very concerned. But this thing is different. It's not like you can send people out, because in sending people out to respond to it, you're putting people at risk. So that's a concern. It's crazy, to put it plainly.
Yeah, it is. It's really, I think we're all feeling it to different degrees. It's just unlike anything I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I'm sure a lot of other people can say the same. It's just really scary.
It's terrifying. It's terrifying. The potential for this is terrifying. You know, it has the potential to impact every aspect of our lives. You know, the way that we interact with one another and live our lives has now changed. And I think, you know, some people who are young or who don't have anybody who is potentially susceptible to it can kind of be a little bit more cavalier about the way that they approach it. But if you have a family member who is in that category, like Charity, who has asthma, if she were to get it, it could potentially be the end. That's a sobering thought. You can go to the supermarket to get your groceries and get this thing and then develop severe, you know, complications to the virus. That is sobering.
Yeah.
I don't really, you know, I don't think that it's going to go that far. But in my mind, with the kind of person that I am, being not a conspiracy theorist, but or just looking at the potential for it to go really bad, how do you respond to that? And it's been legitimately keeping me up at night, thinking about this, watching the numbers grow and the spread, and, you know, those maps where they show, you know, a light-colored state and then this dark red state is, you know, the epicenter of the pandemic. It's crazy. It's the only way that I could put it.
Yeah, it really is. So I just want to take a second to tell all the listeners, if you're not already, please stay home if you can. And also, if there are any people in the healthcare industry listening, thank you so much for all that you're doing. And the food industry, anything really essential out there. Thank you so much for, you know,
yeah, truly, in this
being
kind of
out
thing.
there. Yeah.
This is a time to thank those people who are maintaining the stability of our lives.
Yeah.
The people who work at the grocery stores. You know, Charity's sister, Amber, is a nurse.
Right.
Or actually, I'm sorry, she's a radiologist. So, you know, she's one of the stopping points for anybody who's infected with this to check on them. So she's at risk, and, you know, I've thanked her. It's amazing how devastating this can be, but also how you see the humanity in people and how they're concerned. And, you know, you see a lot more people walking around. A lot more people are saying hi to one another that would normally not, because we're all in this together.
Yeah. And I think that is a positive thing that's coming out of this. I think that it's going to be important moving forward not to forget who these essential workers are and to continue giving them the same respect we're giving them today once this is over. And to not discount that work because, that's more important than, giving recognition to the people who, quote unquote, are essential, but aren't the ones on the front line of this.
Absolutely.
Like the people that we give status to that might not be as important as we think.
I think this kind of has highlighted that reality. Like, we do place a lot of importance on people who don't really perform an essential task. And, in your normal life, you just go to the supermarket, you check out, you don't even say anything to the person who's there, or there's a stalker that's in your way when you're trying to get your can of whatever. Those are the people who make it possible for you to live. The construction worker that's working on the road, or the guy who's working on the power lines, or whatever the case may be. So I think that might be an interesting change at the end of this. How we look at the dynamic of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly hope so. I think that there are a lot of things that we're learning in this time, and I hope it carries over to after we get over this hump.
Or it could be weird, and we end up in Demolition Man.
Demolition Man? What is that?
It's a movie from, I think, the 80s, or like early 90s, where something like this happened, and there's like extreme social distancing.
And we never return.
We never return to normal life.
Yeah, no, I think that once this is all said and done, like, people are going to be out in the world celebrating, going to their favorite restaurants, and hopefully being socially close.
I think Lysol might have a big share after this, because I think people are going to be ultra concerned.
Oh yeah, this is definitely
like legitimately spraying people off before they shake hands, or if we ever start shaking hands again, which is an interesting thought.
I know. I did see a tweet the other day, and it was like, "There's no reason for us to start shaking hands again after this."
I know that's an interesting thing, because I'm also I have social media thing, and I see those memes too, and I'm like, I think there's a lot of people who are really going to kind of steer more towards that. I'm just going to stay this way. Yeah. Social distancing seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely have discovered through this process that I'm less of an introvert than I thought I was, because I am so just itching to be around people again. I
don't know. I'm not like that. I don't work like that, and I don't really live like that. My work is pretty individual.
Right.
So I don't really have a lot of social interaction. But I think everybody, we're social creatures, so we want to talk to people. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of weird to have a conversation with your neighbor where you would normally get within normal, quote-unquote, conversational space, and I'm yelling at him from my balcony or from my porch to his driveway, which is about a good 20 feet.
Yeah.
We're having a normal conversation 20 feet apart. That's a bit weird.
It's a little weird, but it's the world we're living in right now.
Yeah. For now, I'm just hoping that later on, hopefully when we get through this thing on the other side, that it kind of gets back to normal.
Yeah. I would hope so. I think that it's going to be interesting to see A, how long this lasts, and B, what the larger implications for it are. I think a lot more is going to change in the digital sphere as well, because a lot of work before was seen as something you couldn't do remote.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So
I was thinking about that too, like schools, if through this experience, it becomes more effective to homeschool digitally from an actual, school, and they kind of put the infrastructure for that in place, you may see that that's how they do it more often.
Yeah. And I think that something that I've noticed, which I really like, is that a lot of like yoga studios or Pilates studios are doing digital classes through Zoom.
Yeah.
And I really like that. I think that would be something really awesome that they continue to offer once this is over.
I think that's kind of a cool thing, that you have the option or the opportunity to do it that way and kind of live your life from a remote location. But we just talked about it, not everybody is kind of taking this quarantine life all that well. They're still on Twitter and Snapchat and TikTok and all the rest of that stuff, and they have that social interaction, but that distance becomes a thing, and it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
So you can go to school online and, do your Pilates classes in the comfort of your own living room, but how do you socialize outside of that? You know,
Yeah.
It's just weird. It's the potential for where this goes after has a lot of interesting potential outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's been kind of cool because I've been talking to my friends on the phone a lot more and video calling a lot more too. So I think that's kind of the social piece. I know I haven't talked to many of these friends that I've been talking to on the phone before.
I know that is an interesting thing where you're in your normal life, you know, you shoot off a couple text messages, hey, how you doing? Haven't heard from you in a while, and you kind of converse over text. But during this, I think a lot more people are actually talking.
Yeah.
No, like when you were growing up, I said that thing in your hand actually also makes phone calls. I think a lot of people are realizing that, you know?
Oh, yeah. I
you can actually
physically
call.
talk to and actually see them, too.
Yeah, with, FaceTime and all the rest of the stuff that they have.
Yeah. So that's been a positive out of this. And I think, too, just getting a break from how busy things are in everyday life, that I think is also going to be beneficial for a lot of people to just take a moment and wonder to themselves, why am I in this constant loop of needing to be busy all of the time?
I absolutely. I think as Americans, we're in, like, our culture is just busy.
Go.
Busy. It's just like culturally acceptable to just be busy all the time. And I think out of this, people are going to realize that I don't necessarily need to be that busy. You know, I can have a moment, carve out some time in my day to just to be, chill and relaxed.
Yeah, and to tap into creativity, I think, too, because I've noticed a lot of people are going back to, painting and music, and I've just seen so many people creating stuff through this time. And a book I would recommend is Big Magic, because I think it's really relevant to what we're going through right now and people kind of trying to tap into that creativity more. Basically, this book by Elizabeth Gilbert's, it talks about how a lot of the time we try to monetize that creative part of ourselves, and a lot of people will say, oh, well, I'm not creative. And the whole point is that, yes, everybody, we are all born with this drive to create whatever that medium might be. And so that's an interesting thing I've seen. I feel like a lot of more people are creating just to create and not necessarily doing it to monetize it, because I think especially in this like gig economy, we're all trying to monetize everything we do, which can just be soul sucking.
Oh yeah, for sure. But again, I think that's just kind of the culture that we live in. Busy, make money, get to the next hurdle kind of mentality.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think this pandemic and the quarantine and this kind of thing, I think is going to bring a lot of things to light, just like put some clarity maybe. I mean, it's a serious thing, and I think at the same time that you're looking at people becoming more creative, I think they're probably reflecting a lot on their life because, we don't know what the end of this might look like.
Right.
So if you're looking at it from the worst case scenario, that has its own implications on your life. And then now we have the time to look at that. Have you been appreciative? Have you told the people that you love them? Have you spent the right amount of time with the people that you care about? Have you really kind of prioritized your life?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really think it's going to be that bad, but I think that in a lot of people's minds it can be.
Right.
And so they have an opportunity in the face of that to really look at themselves and reflect.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll see how it all goes. I'm hopeful that we're going to get it figured out, hopefully sooner rather than later, but, the reality of the situation is that we all need to cooperate regardless if it lasts like a month or many months. I guess we'll just have to...
There are really smart people working tirelessly to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And I have confidence and faith that they'll do it.
Yeah, I think so too. So, you are one of the first people I know actually to have downloaded TikTok in real life, which is funny because you're my dad and I had no desire to download the app and you were like way ahead of the trend So what is it that you love so much about TikTok?
I think people inside themselves like don't think that there are other people out there that are like them. Mm-hmm. You know, that have the same interests that they do, and you just see people. You know, it's just interesting to get that view of people. You know, the funny things that they do, the serious things that they do, the things that they find motivational, the things that people internalize throughout their normal life, and it's kind of just a window into that world. And I don't know, I dig it. I really do. I think it's an awesome app. I love it. It's so addicting.
It is. You can just scroll forever. It's funny though, because I feel like in the beginning of TikTok, well, it used to be Musical.ly, but then it turned into this new app, and I think a lot of people just kind of like scoffed at it, like, oh, these Gen Z kids just doing ridiculous things on this app. But there's a lot of people on there, like a lot of older people, and yeah, a lot of Gen Z kids. But I personally think the Gen Z generation is going to be like such an interesting one. I'm a millennial, but I think it's going to be cool to see like what they do, and it's cool to get a peek into that, you know, generation of people too.
I don't know. I guess it's like Facebook is a similar type of thing. You have, you know, you can interact with people, you can write comments and stuff like that. But I think it's just a different version of that, you know, where you have, you know, a set amount of time that you can make a video about a thing that you're interested in, or a dance that you just learned, or, you know, doing funny jokes or playing pranks on people. I mean, there's something for every interest on TikTok.
Yeah, which is the cool thing. Yeah, and I think it was the common misconception that it was just like for younger people. But there's so much cool stuff on there. Again, people just creating, and there's been a lot of really funny, insightful content built around this quarantine as well on there. Man,
there's so many funny things. It's hilarious, you know, the working from home stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I love it.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite TikTok?
Wow. I have so many. There's this, I don't know her name. I'm sorry. But she does really good lip syncs of different scenes of movies, or, you know, just the stuff that people do on TikTok. And she's really good at it, and she's hilarious. Mm-hmm. 'Cause she only does the funny ones. I try to kind of stick with funny people.
Yeah.
And I you know, there's a few people who do similar things, like welding and machining and, you know, that kind of stuff. So they do like a little, you know, fast video of the stuff, something cool that they made. I dig a lot of the inspirational people. Don't remember his name right now either, but, you know, just interestingly enough, he says a lot of the things that I've been saying for years, you know, but it's just on this medium where he can connect with, you know, a large amount of people. Mm-hmm. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So funny, motivational, and creators.
Yeah. I think it's a really cool medium and a way to express yourself, and I've really enjoyed it. I watch a lot of like the artists or the funny stuff on there. Okay, so next I wanted to ask you about any stories you have from my childhood.
Wow, you put me on the spot. I don't know. I remember, you know, I was very young when you were born, so I was a baby. You know, I was a little kid. So I still had my interests. I loved going fishing. I loved going on walks through the woods and doing all this stuff. And seeing as I had a kid, you came along with me. So when I was going fishing, you were right there with me in your little stroller. You know, I'd take you on the little trails, and you were four-wheeling in this little stroller. I broke literally like 4 of these things. I know, you just were always with me, doing funny stuff and saying crazy things. And, you know, one of the regrets I have, because your younger brother lives in this era where we have our phones and we can take videos and document their life. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do that back then. I had a little, you know, disposable camera. So it's not the same. So I don't have the same, I have memories, but it's not solidified, you know? Mm-hmm. You can't just come up with them.
Yeah.
You were a cute kid.
Yeah, I know. One of my favorite memories growing up was whenever you would take us fishing and you'd make me a little fishing pole out of a Coke can.
Oh, yeah. I do remember that.
Don't know if I ever caught anything with that thing, but...
No, you weren't really a good fisherman. But
yeah, well, whatever.
but I have good memories of doing that with you, and taking you fishing, you and your sister, and, doing those sorts of things. I remember when I took you shooting. That was really cool. Mm-hmm. And you shot this gun, and you were all scared, but then you kind of got comfortable with it, and, I love being a dad. I have great memories, but I cannot remember them right now.
All right, well... You heard it here, folks. My dad does not remember my childhood.
No, I love you, and I remember fondly your childhood. I just don't have any particular stories that I can kind of say right now.
That's okay. So, growing up, you always had the best little nuggets of knowledge. Do you have any favorite pieces of advice that you could share with my listener?
Never give up. If you want to truly master a thing, whether that be, sport, any activity in your life, in any aspect of your life, don't give up. Have laser focus on that thing and be driven towards achieving the goal. And then, of course, you don't want to ever plateau. You learn. Every day is a learning opportunity. Every day you can gain a little nugget of knowledge. And hone your craft. If you're if you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner, you go to the mat all the time. If you are, I guess anything that you do it to the best of your ability and really be focused on that thing and never give up. Success is built on a foundation of failures. I'm sure all of these are ringing bells.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that's pretty much all I had for you. Thanks again for sitting in this freezing car and doing a podcast for me.
You're welcome, baby. Anytime.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Stories from Planet Earth. If you have some time, leave us a review and be sure to subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts. Find us on Instagram at SFPE Podcasts. I'll talk to you next week.